You ever wake up next to someone you've shared a bed with for over 20 years and suddenly realize you're lying beside a stranger? Not physically, of course. Her body was still there, curled up in the same way she always slept, her shoulder peeking out from under that old fleece blanket we'd had since our second anniversary. But emotionally, spiritually, in every way that actually matters, it felt like someone else entirely had taken the place of the woman I married. It had started so subtly I almost blamed myself for a while, her laughter becoming less frequent, her phone screen lighting up more often and facing further away, her kisses getting shorter, colder, until one morning she didn't kiss me at all. I told myself it was work stress or hormones or maybe just the ordinary erosion of routine after decades of marriage, but deep down, something darker started to take root. A whisper in the back of my mind that maybe the distance between us wasn't just emotional fatigue, maybe it was someone else. And that whisper got a hell of a lot louder when my best friend Mike started showing up more than usual, dropping by with six-packs on weekdays, cracking jokes louder than they were funny, calling my wife Care Bear, like he had some inside joke I was never part of. Now, Mike and I went back over 30 years. He was the kind of guy who helped me change my first flat tire, gave a toast at my wedding, and stood by my side when my mom passed. And yet, lately, something about the way he hugged my wife lingered just a second too long. The way his eyes flicked to her when he thought I wasn't looking. I tried to shake it off because accusing your best friend and your wife of something like that without proof feels like setting fire to your entire life over a gut feeling. But then came the moment that changed everything, a Friday night cookout in our own backyard, with the scent of mesquite still hanging in the air, Mike standing 3 feet from me, laughing with Karen as if nothing in the world was wrong, and yet, when she left to run to the store, he left too, without saying goodbye. My gut twisted like a rope being pulled from both ends, and when I walked back into the house and saw her phone left behind on the kitchen counter, I swear to God, something inside me already knew. Now, I'm not proud of what I did next, but I won't apologize either, because when that message notification buzzed across the screen, my hands moved before my brain could catch up. One message. One little bubble that would shatter everything I believed about my marriage, my friendship, and myself. And in that moment, standing there in the kitchen with my wife's phone in my hand and my whole life balancing on the edge of one text, all I could hear was Mike's voice echoing in my head from just hours earlier. You're like a brother to me, man. A brother. That word hit different now. Because if what I saw was real, if what I suspected was true, then that meant the man who called me bro had been screwing my wife behind my back. And from that point on, I made a silent vow that I would not scream, I would not cry, I would not break, but I would find out the truth. And when I did, I would burn everything they built together to the damn ground. People say your instincts can't always be trusted, that your brain's built to look for patterns, even when there's nothing there. But the moment that text lit up my wife's phone, I didn't feel paranoid or insecure. I felt something ancient rise inside me, something primal and ugly and absolutely certain. The message was short, almost casual, but every word hit me like a steel-toed boot to the ribs. Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. There was no name, no emojis, just a raw statement wrapped in sin and sent at 8:42 p.m., the exact time Karen told me she was grabbing coffee with her sister. My hands started to tremble, not with fear, but with something worse, confirmation. For a second, I actually looked around the room, like someone might jump out from behind the fridge and yell, just kidding. But there was no one there. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the slow, painful realization that my marriage, the life I built with this woman, might already be a corpse dressed up to look like something still alive. I didn't open the message thread. I didn't scroll up. Not yet. I placed the phone back exactly where I found it, screen down, not because I was afraid of what I'd find, but because I knew once I crossed that line, once I knew without a doubt, there was no going back. And that's the thing about betrayal that people don't talk about. It doesn't just hurt you, it changes you. It rewires your sense of reality. Suddenly every hug feels rehearsed. Every "I love you" sounds like a lie rehearsed in the mirror, and worst of all, every shared memory becomes tainted, like a glass of water with one drop of poison. And the most twisted part? As I stood there in my own kitchen in the house I helped build, the only thing I could think about was the way Mike had hugged her goodbye last week, one arm low on her back, lips lingering a second too long near her ear. I had laughed it off, called him a flirt. God help me. I even thanked him for always being so supportive of Karen when I had to work late. So I made a decision right then and there not to confront, not to scream, not to rage. No, I was going to watch. I was going to observe the way a hunter watches its prey, silently, patiently, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Because the truth wasn't enough, I needed proof. Proof so solid it would crush every excuse and lie they tried to throw at me. So I smiled when she came back through the door 20 minutes later, hair slightly windswept, cheeks flushed, coffee cup in hand. I asked how her sister was, and she smiled and said, "Oh, you know Beth, always dramatic." I nodded. And that night, when she curled up beside me and fell asleep like she hadn't just shattered everything we built, I stared at the ceiling for hours, planning the next steps of a quiet revenge I was no longer ashamed to want. Because if the man who called me brother could stab me in the back, then I was done playing the nice guy. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. People always imagine revenge as some dramatic, explosive moment, a fist through drywall, a shattered dish, a screaming match at 2 a.m., but I learned quickly that the most dangerous kind of revenge doesn't make a sound. It moves like fog, silent and slow, creeping into every room of your life until you realize it's too late to breathe. After reading that message, I didn't lose my temper, I found clarity. Because once you stop denying the truth, you begin to see. And what I saw was that my wife had become a stranger sleeping in my bed, and my best friend, Mike, had transformed into a snake with a handshake. I knew if I wanted to hit them where it hurt, I couldn't just walk in with accusations and half-truths. No, I needed undeniable proof. The kind that would leave no room for gaslighting, no wiggle room for tears, no backpedaling or stories about needing connection or feeling neglected. So, I started preparing for war the only way I knew how, with precision, patience, and a quiet fury that no one saw coming. The first step was technology, nothing fancy, just smart. I installed a GPS tracker app on Karen's phone while she was in the shower one evening, her phone carelessly charging on the nightstand like it wasn't a ticking time bomb of betrayal. Then came the minicam, a discreet little thing I placed in the garage, aimed perfectly at the back door she sometimes used when Mike came by to help with repairs. I told her I was installing new motion sensors to deter break-ins, and she nodded without even looking up from her phone. That was the moment I knew she didn't suspect a thing. She thought she had me wrapped up in the same clueless routine I'd been in for the last 2 decades. Get up, go to work, pay the bills, be a good husband. But not anymore. I began cataloging her comings and goings, took note of the night she came home just a little too late, her perfume lingering stronger than it should have been, her excuses thinner than tissue paper. And every time she kissed my cheek, I smiled, because I already knew what was coming. And the most twisted part of it all? Mike kept calling me bro. That word became a sick little punctuation mark at the end of every sentence he said. Hey bro, you need help changing the filter in your HVAC? Or bro, you still down for poker night next week? The man looked me in the eye, laughed with me, slapped my back, drank my beer, all while screwing my wife behind my back like it was just another Saturday chore. But I didn't flinch. I didn't tip my hand. I let him believe I was still that same loyal, clueless friend, because the best revenge doesn't come when they're ready for it. It comes when they're laughing with their mouth full, thinking they've won, and the whole house starts to burn around them. So I waited. And I watched. Because if they thought they could play me, they'd soon find out I'd rewritten the entire damn game. I always believed that the truth, no matter how ugly, would bring some kind of peace, like once you knew, the guessing would stop, the torment would ease, and you could finally breathe again. But let me tell you something I learned the hard way. Confirmation doesn't bring peace, it brings fire. It was a Tuesday night, around 9:30 p.m., and Karen had claimed she was working late, helping her team prep for a quarterly meeting. I smiled, kissed her forehead, and watched her walk out the door in a dress just tight enough to make me sick to my stomach. The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, I opened my laptop, loaded the GPS tracking app, and saw her location ping at Pineview Inn, a motel on the far end of town, tucked just enough off the highway to be cheap and discreet. I didn't even blink. I just waited like a man holding a fuse, watching it burn slowly toward the stick of dynamite that used to be his life. An hour later, I opened the video footage from the garage cam, and there he was. Mike. My bro walking right up to the back door like he owned the place, glancing around like a damn cartoon villain, then slipping inside with the spare key I had forgotten we even gave him back when we trusted him. I sat there in the dark, watching the screen, heart pounding, rage flooding through my chest like someone had taken a sledgehammer to my ribs. But it wasn't just the betrayal, it was the ease of it. The routine. This wasn't their first time. The way they moved, the way Karen giggled when he touched her lower back, the way they didn't even lock the door behind them, it told me everything I needed to know. They weren't being careful because they didn't need to be. In their eyes, I wasn't a threat. I was a fool. A ghost. Just a piece of furniture they walked past on the way to their next thrill. And I wish I could say I looked away. I wish I could say I stopped the footage and spared myself the worst of it, but I didn't. I watched. Every second. Every stolen touch. Every laugh. Every lie, playing out in high definition right there in the place I used to call home. I watched until the screen went black and Mike walked back out the way he came, wiping his mouth with the same hand he'd shaken mine with just days earlier. And I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring into the quiet dark, knowing full well what came next. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a stage play, and I'd been cast as the fool. But they'd forgotten one thing: the fool always gets the final act. And when that curtain drops, I promise you, they're going to wish I had never found out. People expect rage, screaming, broken dishes, fists through drywall, but what they don't understand is that real betrayal doesn't ignite fire, it freezes you. And once you're cold enough, you start to think clearly, precisely, even dangerously. After watching that footage, my wife and my best friend turning my home into a crime scene of trust, I didn't confront them. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I smiled through breakfast the next morning like I hadn't just watched my life collapse in high definition. I passed her the butter while remembering the way her hands touched him. I cracked a joke to Mike over text while knowing exactly where his lips had been less than 12 hours earlier. This wasn't passive aggression. This was the coiled silence before a storm, the kind of quiet that makes animals run for cover and smart men double-check the locks. Because I wasn't going to yell. I was going to bury them, not with fists, but with precision, with planning, and most of all, with truth. The first thing I did was talk to a lawyer, a good one. The kind of man who wears tailored suits, talks slow, and charges by the hour like he's billing in gold. I didn't walk in like a victim. I walked in like a CEO preparing a hostile takeover. We drew up a quiet exit strategy, financial accounts separated, assets frozen, digital paper trails cataloged and timestamped. My lawyer smiled when I told him I wasn't planning to confront her until everything was ready. Smart, he said. People underestimate the power of silence. Next, I backed up all the video footage and GPS data to 3 separate drives, one with my lawyer, one in a safety deposit box, and one hidden in plain sight in my garage, tucked behind a jar of rusted screws. Then I started laying the social groundwork, casual chats with friends, subtle mentions of Karen acting distant, planting seeds just deep enough that when everything bloomed, they wouldn't be surprised, they'd be ashamed for not seeing it sooner. And while I orchestrated the fall of my marriage like a chess master watching pawns march into a trap, Karen and Mike laughed in my kitchen. They toasted drinks at our barbecue. She called me babe, and he called me bro, and neither of them saw the hurricane building behind my eyes. I'd never acted better in my life. I was patient, polished, predictable, and that's exactly how I wanted them to see me. Because the worst thing you can do to a liar is give them enough rope to hang themselves while you smile and hand them the noose. The day of reckoning was coming, and it wouldn't be messy or emotional. It would be surgical, cold, absolute. And when it came, I'd make sure they understood the full weight of what they'd thrown away, not just a marriage or a friendship, but me. The man they thought was blind, the man they never saw coming. If you ever want to watch someone's soul leave their body in real time, all you need is a screen, a crowd, and one devastating truth timed perfectly. Karen's birthday was approaching, her 44th, and like every other year, she expected me to throw the kind of party that would make her feel adored, celebrated, and envied by everyone we knew. And I did. Oh, I did. I rented out the rooftop banquet hall of the nicest restaurant in town, hired a private chef, printed custom menus with her name embossed in gold foil. I even sent out engraved invitations to friends, family, and, of course, Mike. Because nothing says final curtain like putting both of your betrayers in the same room, surrounded by people who love and respect you, just minutes before you flip their world inside out in front of everyone. I smiled through every detail. I coordinated florals with her sister, I handpicked a wine she loved, and I stood at the entrance greeting guests like the perfect husband, the kind who has no idea his world is about to implode. Except I did. I knew exactly what I was doing. Because this party wasn't a celebration. It was an execution. The energy that night was electric. Laughter echoed off the walls, glasses clinked, and Karen beamed like the queen of the night, dressed in a navy silk dress that caught every shimmer of light and none of the shame buried underneath her smile. Mike arrived late, as usual, playing it cool with his button-down sleeves rolled halfway, sunglasses tucked into the front of his shirt like some teenage heartthrob. He walked straight over, clapped me on the back, and called me bro, the word now so hollow it echoed like a bullet casing hitting concrete. I gave a toast, heartfelt and elegant, filled with little anecdotes that made the guests laugh and Karen blush. Then I said there was one last surprise, something I'd been working on for months, a video montage of memories from our marriage, from the early years to now. The lights dimmed. The screen flickered on. And at first, it was exactly what everyone expected. Wedding footage, our first home, birthdays, holidays. Then it changed. The footage glitched, paused, and restarted. Only this time, it wasn't our wedding. It was Mike and Karen. In my garage. On my couch. At the Pineview Inn. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. Forks froze midair. Gasps broke the silence like gunshots. Karen let out a sound. Not a scream, not a cry, just a strangled, breathless choke that said everything. Mike stood frozen, eyes wide, jaw twitching, face pale like a man staring down the barrel of his own legacy. I didn't say a word. I let the footage speak for itself. Time-stamped, crystal clear, indisputable. I walked off the stage while the screen still played behind me, stepped into the hallway as chaos erupted inside, and took a deep, clean breath. For the first time in weeks, I felt lighter. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because they had spent months stabbing me in the back, and now, finally, I turned around. And they were still holding the knife. There's a silence that follows public betrayal. Not the kind of silence you find in empty rooms or in quiet conversations, but the suffocating kind that falls over a room full of people who just witnessed the ugliest truth unravel like a noose being dropped at the feet of the guilty. After the final frame of that footage faded to black, Karen's face twisted in pleasure, Mike's voice whispering something disgusting just loud enough to be picked up on the mic. The room didn't erupt into chaos. No, it froze. It held its breath like God himself had walked in and said, "Watch this." Then, one by one, gasps gave way to whispers. Whispers turned into stunned disbelief. And finally, the dam burst. Voices rising, glasses shattering, chairs scraping across the floor as people stood up in disbelief, their eyes darting between Karen and Mike like they couldn't quite decide who disgusted them more. I didn't wait for the aftershock. I'd already left the room, my work done, my hands clean. Karen followed me into the hallway moments later, her heels clicking like a funeral march, her breath shallow, her mascara already bleeding down her face in thick, guilty lines. "David," she started, her voice cracking under the weight of panic and humiliation. "I can explain." I didn't say a word. I didn't even look at her. I just held up my hand, flat, firm, final, and she stopped like she'd hit a wall. She knew. There was no lie that could survive what just happened. No excuse, no sob story, no half-baked blame game about feeling unloved or lonely or losing herself in the routine of marriage. She wasn't some lost wife. She was a liar, a cheater, a woman who had the audacity to crawl back into my bed night after night while sharing her body with my best friend and pretending nothing had changed. And now the truth was out, not whispered, not discovered in secret, but broadcasted on a screen in front of the very people she pretended to respect. Her parents, her coworkers, our neighbors, our friends. As for Mike, well, let's just say the man didn't leave through the front door. I heard from a friend later that he tried to sneak out the back entrance and ended up getting cornered in the kitchen by two of our poker buddies, guys who'd known us both since college, who used to call him the good guy when I wasn't around. They didn't hit him. That would have been too easy. No, they stared him down, shamed him, told him exactly what he was, what he'd thrown away, and then, as the final blow, told him not to bother showing his face at poker again. His legacy? Erased in under 60 seconds. When I got in my car and pulled out of that parking lot, I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel triumphant, either. I felt something much deeper settled, like a man who had been drowning for months and finally reached the surface. And as I drove home in silence, Karen's frantic calls going straight to voicemail, I knew this wasn't over. It was just beginning. But for her and Mike, that was the night their lives began to fall apart. And unlike me, they'd never recover. There's a specific kind of silence that fills a home after the truth detonates, not the peaceful quiet of a Sunday morning or the soft hush after a heartfelt hug, but the hollow, surgical stillness of a battlefield after the smoke clears and you're standing alone, surrounded by ruins you didn't ask for but damn sure expected. Karen didn't come home that night. I imagine she didn't have the guts to face me, or maybe she thought the absence would soften me, make me miss her, maybe even miss us. But what she didn't understand is that the moment that video ended and her voice turned to static behind me, something inside me that had spent years fighting to stay alive finally died. The next morning, I sat in my lawyer's office, fresh suit, calm voice, documents in hand. I wasn't there to negotiate. I wasn't there to cry. I was there to end it. I handed over the evidence, the footage, the logs, the timestamps, the digital skeleton of a marriage that had already rotted to the core. Make it clean, I told him. Make it final. Within 72 hours, the divorce papers were served, hand-delivered, with precision and weight, like a final verdict written in ink and fire. She called me 6 times that day, and I didn't answer once. When she finally cornered me outside the bank, wild-eyed and shaking, she tried to play the hits, the trembling lip, the soft voice, the David, we can fix this. But it was too late for repairs. I'd already done the math, tallied the cost, and made peace with the loss. I don't want revenge, I said, my voice steady, my hands loose at my sides. I want freedom. And that's exactly what I took from her. The house? Mine. The savings? Locked and divided by the court, with my lawyer ensuring she couldn't touch what she hadn't earned. Reputation? Destroyed. Her friends? Gone. Even her own parents, people I once called family, refused to look her in the eye after that night. She moved into a studio apartment across town, stripped of the life we built, and somehow still had the nerve to act surprised that betrayal came with consequences. And Mike? Let's just say karma has a brutal sense of humor. Fired from his job within the week, apparently, some clients didn't love the idea of doing business with a homewrecker whose greatest achievement was stabbing his best friend in the back while borrowing his lawnmower. His girlfriend dumped him, his truck got repossessed, and last I heard, he was crashing on his cousin's couch, drinking cheap beer and watching reruns of a life he could have had if he hadn't thrown it away. I didn't have to lift a finger. The truth did all the heavy lifting for me. And as for me, I slept better that week than I had in years, not because I won, but because I let go. Let go of the lies. Let go of the rot. Let go of a woman who didn't know what loyalty meant until it walked out her front door and never came back. She thought I'd beg. She thought I'd break. She thought I'd stay. But the thing about betrayal is, once you survive it, you never go back to being the man they thought they could destroy. There's a strange kind of freedom that comes after losing everything you thought mattered, the kind that doesn't show up with fireworks or applause, but creeps in quietly, like the first breeze after a storm you weren't sure you'd survive. In the weeks following the divorce, I didn't celebrate. I didn't date. I didn't rage or sulk or drown myself in whiskey and what-ifs. Instead, I rebuilt. Slowly. Silently. Powerfully. I woke up every morning with a new clarity, a calmness that came from knowing no one could betray me anymore, because I had finally stopped giving my loyalty to people who didn't deserve it. I started walking again, not the aimless pacing of sleepless nights, but real walks, every evening, through the neighborhood I used to drive past without noticing. I dropped 20 pounds without even trying, changed my wardrobe, cut my hair differently, and even started smiling again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Professionally, I doubled down. I took all the energy I'd wasted on trying to hold a crumbling marriage together and poured it into my business, and within 6 months, I'd opened a second location across town. Clients started complimenting the new me, and I didn't correct them because they weren't wrong. This wasn't a revenge body or a post-divorce comeback. This was evolution. I became sharper in every way, more direct, more disciplined, more dangerous to anyone who thought they could use me again. And the best part? I didn't announce any of it. No cryptic Facebook posts. No bitter rants. No second chances. I let my silence do the talking, and it spoke volumes. Meanwhile, Karen? She faded like an old photograph, still visible, but no longer relevant. Word spread fast that she was working part-time at a local boutique, barely scraping by, her friends gone, her dignity scattered like ashes after a burn she never saw coming. And as for Mike, the last time I saw him, he was standing outside the corner store, leaning against a rusted Toyota with one headlight out, wearing the same boots he'd worn at our fishing trip 3 years ago, except now they looked worn, cracked, and as tired as the man wearing them. He didn't say anything when our eyes met. Didn't try to speak. He just looked at me, not with anger or shame, but something worse, regret. And in that moment, I felt nothing. No hatred. No satisfaction. Just peace. Because I wasn't broken. I wasn't bitter. I was better. I didn't just survive what they did to me, I outgrew it. And that's the part they never saw coming. They thought betrayal would destroy me. What it did instead was set me free. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I've learned that the real satisfaction doesn't come from striking back. It comes from not needing to. It had been nearly a year since I walked out of that banquet hall, leaving behind a shattered marriage and the charred remains of a friendship that used to mean everything. I hadn't heard from Karen in months, not since the settlement was finalized and the last of the shared accounts were split. I didn't follow her on social media, didn't ask mutual friends about her, didn't linger in places where she might appear. That part of my life was over, sealed off like a chapter I'd read too many times, each line dripping with betrayal and disappointment. I didn't just move on, I evolved. My business was thriving, my nights were peaceful, and for the first time in years, I woke up each morning with purpose instead of pain. I didn't think much about seeing her again, until fate decided it was time to remind her exactly what she lost. It was a Saturday morning, bright and crisp, one of those rare days where time feels generous and the world feels new. I stopped by the grocery store on my way to the gym, just a quick run for some fruit and coffee, when I saw her. Karen, standing at the checkout, wearing a faded hoodie and name tag from a discount clothing store that hadn't seen a remodel since the 90s. Her hair was pulled back, but it couldn't hide the weight in her eyes, the dullness in her face that only shows up when a person has spent too long living in regret. She hadn't seen me at first, but when she turned, and our eyes locked, it was like the air got sucked out of the building. She froze. Half a smile crept up, not joy, not confidence, but that forced expression people wear when they're desperate to appear unaffected. "David," she said, barely above a whisper, "can we talk?" I looked at her for a long second, not with hate, not with anger, but with a kind of peace that must have felt like hell to her. And then I gave her the final answer she never saw coming. "No thanks," I said, voice steady, gaze unblinking. "I've got somewhere better to be." I turned without another word, walked out into the sunlight, and let the automatic doors shut behind me like a curtain dropping after the final act. I didn't glance back. I didn't wonder how she felt, because I already knew. She lost a good man, the kind of man who would have gone to the ends of the earth for her, who once believed in vows and forgiveness and the kind of love that bends but doesn't break. And she traded that for a thrill that lasted less than a season. Meanwhile, I was just getting started, healthier, stronger, sharper than I'd ever been. That was the final laugh. Not a punch. Not a scream. Just walking away whole, while she stood there, broken, watching the man she destroyed become the man she could never have again.